Hey guys, how you doing? This is your Black YouTube therapist, aka D Derell, the Godfather, aka the GOAT. I'm here once again. I will be doing a short video today that will be broadcasting on D Derell Life Solutions and also on D Derell the Rebirth Live. This particular live stream um, deals with a debate and just a discussion on autism. I linked up with my brother, Great Pill Podcast, who I've interacted with on my other brother, We Unlock, and I've also seen him in other areas. And he also has participated a few times on several several of the serious subject matters that I may talk about on my D Derail the Rebirth Live channel. Just to kind of give you a bit of an introduction of the reason why I decided to do this video is because I um, saw his channel in the algorithm the other day, maybe about a week and a half ago, and they were talking about autism. They were talking about different things as it relates to mental illness. There was a person that I was very familiar with by the name of Ruby. I know her by Classic Ruby because I've known her for at least, I would say, 4 years, by way of my brother BMT, who I've interacted with and did numerous content with over the years. In this particular video here, it will detail it will detail an interaction of basically four parties: Gray Pill, Ruby, and some other guy, a unmelanated person, that was speaking on autism and what they viewed and their views of it, and also in some way an assessment or criticism of the mental health field as it involves the treatment of people who have autism, the diagnoses, long-term prognosis, just a descriptive of how does one know whether or not they have it or not, and what services that they can obtain in order to get treatment and live a more functional life. So that kind of gives kind of somewhat of an introduction. And so what I made an attempt to do is that my brother here, that's Great Pill Podcast, and towards the end of the show, I learned for the first time that a lady by the name of Classic Ruby, who I will show, described her experience with having stage 1 autism, or level 1 autism, which is a mildest form of autism. And so I made a comment in the comment section, which kind of stated, I didn't know you were autism. And most people who have autism are not enthused about being in socially highly interactive states and environments. And so when I made that statement, that triggered and upset Classic Ruby, which I wholeheartedly don't believe that she has autism. And I think that, and I've never met her in real life, but she has never showed any signs from my interaction of someone that I have seen that has been diagnosed professionally with autism. And I know this is the internet, and I know people can act and put on personas, but typically people with autism are not drawn to socially highly interactive states. Just a fact. And I pointed it out. But before we get started, I'm going to allow Great Pill to talk a little bit and give you a bit of a description of what the topic is about.
Know how to approach it. So we're just going to dive into it. I have so much ignorance with this conversation of autism. I thought it was just on the spectrum of kids, but it goes down. It's a lot of this. So we have that conversation. Appreciate you, Lady Nova, as always. Thank you. Yes. Right, like, huh? What are we doing? Are we having a conversation? Yes, we're gonna have that conversation and see what's developed. So stay tuned. Let me go ahead and bring everybody up here.
Okay, so we're going to talk about autism. He's going to bring up classic Ruby, and he's also going to bring up the unmelanated person.
Time, so we had this conversation, okay?
And we can repent and spend the rest of our last lives with Ruby here.
There's a lot going on that weekend, Ruby. That's all I'm gonna say. There's a lot going on. I don't know who started it. Could have been me. Could have been something Wes said. He sometimes
Ruby is the person to the top left, and we will have a very spirited debate.
Tagging it, so there's a lot going on. There's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out to Catnip. That's what I'm gonna say. Shout out to Catnip.
Nothing to say. Mm-mm.
There's a lot going on that weekend, man. Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Uh-huh.
You know how I be in them YouTube streets. I just go ahead, just air myself out now before
Pretty much. Yeah.
Throw it on the bus. He was bad. Oh man. So all right. So I'm gonna ask the ignorant questions because again, I don't know. So I'm gonna start with the ignorant question. What is autism? Okay, because again, I thought it started with children, and I want to do like a kind of like a rough draft, gradual conversation of it, so we can give like a full understanding. Before I do that, I want to give an apology. I actually have do I have 2 apologies I want to give out? No, I have 1 apology, like serious conversation. I'd like to apologize to a Miss B. Taylor. I had posted something on my community wall. My intentions was to support and to I guess give like a round of applause. I didn't know a lot of her background except for I was doing homework on what's the brick lady, whatever the brick lady name is, Rhonda, whatever. I don't give a crap. The one that was scamming last time we talked about, I think like a couple weeks back. So I did like kind of like a review of it, and then a link feed popped up in the news.
So I'm going to stop here and kind of get things going because Ruby's going to talk a little bit, and he's kind of going into things. So I'm going to allow her to express, and then it will go to me.
Social supports is most assistance to live. And then you had, say, Asperger's disorder. That would be like level 1, people who could kind of live, but they were impaired. They could take care of themselves, but there's something a little bit off, right? And then there's a bunch of other types of disorder. There's sensory processing disorders and stuff like that. And now instead of those being individual disorders, they're kind of all on one spectrum. And so they call them autism spectrum disorders. So it's a bunch of different things down the spectrum you can be affected by one or multiple of them. And that will just dictate kind of how you perceive the world, where your shortcomings are as far as, what you struggle with and whatever. Also, how much on a scale of 1 to 10 you can mask those struggles. So like me being level 1, for example, I'm very good at masking, which means I'm very good at kind of hiding my struggles, and people generally from the outside looking in can't tell how much distress or how much struggle I really go through on a day-to-day basis, because early in childhood, I learned how to mitigate that and how to hide it from people. So it's not that I don't experience it, it's just that I'm good at hiding it from other people, right? And people who are level 3 tend to be worse at hiding it or incapable of hiding it.
Examples of
Now, as she is describing what autism is, which is somewhat correctly being put, I'm a little bit taken by her use of saying Asperger's in a sense, because Asperger's has been written out of the DSM since the DSM-4 when it was revised. And the DSM, as far as those who are on that board who write the DSM, they decided to replace that with autism spectrum disorder. I do understand the basis of her using Asperger's disorder, but it is no longer in vogue within the mental health community. But let's continue.
Like when you say masking, because I know last time I brought up a little bit like one individual. He was a guest on Speakeasy platform. I can't remember his name. Rude, if you can remember.
Shout out to the Speakeasy.
Thing, let me know, bro. He was, doing a lot of rocking for the verbal combat. I made a joke, and then someone was like, "Hey."
So I'm going to stop here. Obviously, they're kind of going through things, And so what I like to do is pinpoint when I came in and kind of give the timelines for that. And so at this point, I'm getting ready to come in and they're talking, and I'm going to give an introduction of myself and talk about autism in detail.
A set schedule for themselves. So I didn't want to mess up her schedule, just like, hey, this is what we're talking about. You're more than welcome to invite it. And then her mind might wander on that. So I didn't want to send an invite, but I will send the link to her later, just like, hey, what do you think about this conversation? So let me go ahead and bring up a guest up here real quick. There you go. Appreciate you, Derell. Can you hear us, sir? Derell.
Hey, brother, how you doing, man? What's going on?
Not much. I appreciate you, sir. If you'd like to introduce yourself and give you a little qualifications, all that good stuff, and what you're chatting about.
Yeah. So my name is D. Derell. I go by D. Derell Spears. You can call me my full name, Dempsey Derell Spears. I am a master's level clinician. I have owned my own mental health facility throughout the state of Texas, in Dallas, Houston, and in the Galveston County area, which is a suburb outside of Houston. For the last 15 years, I focus on children with behavioral disorders. I have branched out to handle things along with adults within the community. I do have experience working with autistic children, from the profound up to the mild level. I have worked and did government contracting with kids and adults who have been diagnosed with autism per se. So I wanted to bring my expertise as far as my clinical experience as a licensed clinician, as far as my observing of kids and the mental health process, as far as those who are diagnosed. Okay. I also wanted to kind of point out some of the issues that are going on with the field as far as the misdiagnosing of people with autism that I think has to be in consideration. And also the fact that there's a lot of, particularly on social media, people self-diagnosing themselves based on utilizing information from WebMD, Psychology Today, and other different mental health or counseling. Now, as I was stating this, you can look at Ruby at the top. She is not necessarily happy. I don't think that she was happy that I was here. I think that she took this interview or this me participating as an offense because I don't see autism in the same manner that she does, being that she has, quote unquote, been clinically diagnosed. And I will say things that are not necessarily in line with what she's stating as someone who is coping allegedly with this illness. And so I'm going to go in detail with things and just watch her mannerisms, facial expressions, and that will tell the whole story of this particular engagement. Related sites in which they're looking at symptoms and they're not looking at the nuances that go into someone being diagnosed with autism. So the first thing that I would like to say, and I just want to introduce myself, but just kind of looking at things is that the biggest problem that I see now as we change, because see, it used to be where back in the early, I want to say 2010, 2011, that was a disorder called Asperger's disorder. Okay. When they reformatted the DSM, they combined Asperger's disorder with autism, and they combined them together, and they created Asperger's spectrum disorder, which is basically because Asperger's is basically a mild. What I was really meaning to say was autism spectrum disorder. So I made a slight mistake there, but the correct term is autism spectrum disorder. It's a combination of the original definition of autism and Asperger's disorder. Other form of autism per se, just in a simple form. And so as a clinician, many of the clinicians that I know from psychiatry, psychologists, most of the field disagreed with that. They at least from where the area I'm in, they didn't necessarily agree with that. They did not agree with the term autism spectrum disorder. They felt like there was no clear reason, even though some research showed, a lot of research showed that there was not a significant difference as it relates to people functioning with a milder form of autism and Asperger's disorder. It's kind of very closely related. And if you look at the DSM, I want to say 4 or 3 at the time, a lot of the symptoms, excuse me?
DSM-4 text revision.
Yeah, the DSM-4, a lot of the symptoms, the symptomology was closely linked. Okay. Now, my position is that when I see adults who have graduated from high school, who functioning, and to me, if you truly have autism, and I'm gonna say this through all my years of working with children, I have over 20 years working with children.
Mm-hmm.
If that school is half decent, regardless of the lack of funding, I don't care where you're at, whether you're going to a school that's poorly funded or not, there will be identifiable markers that will occur that will present itself if a child is truly autistic. Before they're, I'm gonna say at least the 2nd or 3rd grade. I have never had a client that was diagnosed with autism past the age of 10 years old.
Well, hold on, 2 questions, because you kept saying truly. So what do you mean by truly, not truly?
Okay, the reason why I'm saying that is because our mental health diagnoses is based on a professional opinion and what I say clinical impression. So there are people who get misdiagnosed based on using that system. Doesn't mean that if you go to one doctor, they may diagnose you with something, and then another doctor may diagnose you with something similar, but may not be the same. And so the reason why I'm saying truly is because I'm using it in a term to allow some level of the fact that there's human error. Okay, mm-hmm. Because the way one doctor may see one thing, another doctor may see it the same way, but may not as significant as the other.
So you're saying not 100%, but if the percent is 75% or higher, wouldn't that still be justified as that person still has autism? Because again, we mentioned earlier, there's like spectrums, not just autism. There's like, hey, I think we mentioned like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's levels to it.
Yeah, that is from profound up to mild. But see, the issue with that is that if a kid truly has autism, I'm going to say 95% of the time, they are going to be diagnosed with autism before they leave elementary school. It's very difficult. And I'm saying this clinically speaking. Mm-hmm. I have never seen a child that was diagnosed with autism get diagnosed with autism in middle school or high school. I've never seen it in 20 years. And I don't know.
The problem is you only work
with
children.
No, I don't. I work with adults too.
Didn't you just
now at that point, a person, Ruby, with no experience, who's never treated or assessed a client in her life, solely her basis is solely on just pure empirical research, which has some validity, wants to question my clinical experience, and she interrupts me.
Say you work with
no, I did not. I did not say that. I said I began my career working with children, and as I progressed since 2008. Mm-hmm. I started working with more adults, and I work with children and adults. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna be honest. I see at least, I would say, 3 to 5 adults that are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder a year. Most of them are highly functional. That 25 years ago, they wouldn't have been diagnosed with autism. They would have been diagnosed with Asperger's disorder. That, and that didn't come from me. That came from the psychologists and the psychiatrists who I worked under in interdisciplinary settings before I went into business for myself, who told me this. So I'm basically not just speaking from myself, but I'm also speaking from experience as it relates to people who are actually in the field itself are more qualified and who actually diagnose and they have more experience and education than I do in this particular syndrome or diagnosis.
So in your expert opinion, so what age? Because you said there's a certain age is like when they get out of a certain school, they're like, I guess like growing out of it. Is that
No,
what we're saying?
you don't grow out of autism. It's
Okay.
a develop. This is something that what I'm stating is that it is highly unlikely. And I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it's highly unlikely for a kid that truly has autism to all. Again, you can see the the very, very immature facial expressions of one classic Ruby or Ruby, in which she does not agree with my clinical assessment. All of a sudden find out they have autism when they're an adult or they are in high school. And that's what I'm saying. It's highly unlikely. I'm not saying it's impossible. Yeah. I said it's based on my experience and others. I've never seen it before. And see, this is not the first time I had an argument about autism in itself, because I did a video about this on my Derell Life Solutions. And I had a whole autism community that was upset with me because I told them that self-diagnosing themselves with autism is not an official diagnosis. And it's not.
Well, that I can agree with, because we all said that self-diagnosis is not a thing. It's pretty much, if we're going the self-diagnosis way, like I said earlier, if I saw an app or if I saw a website, even Ruby said, hey, that's one way to kind of direct you in the right direction to seek the help that you need for yourself. After that, we gave I think she mentioned 2 doctors and ways to how to get that. Even that, again, I gave a percentage for myself, 80% or higher, to kind of lead you in a better direction of just to weed out the people. Hey, if you claiming that you have it, somebody said earlier in the chat, some people like to lie just for the I've seen it on YouTube themselves, hey, I got this illness so people can feel empathy for me, so people can pity me, super chat, and then people the professional doctor will weed that out to say, okay, well, you're just lying. You just want that title just to be that type of person. Now, since we weeded that out, let's actually focus on what exactly going on to the realm of your disorder, and then we could take it from there. So I'll give to Wes. So Wes, if you have any thoughts or comments, and then Ruby.
Okay, so Mr. West is going to speak, and then I'm going to go to Classic Ruby, and she's going to go in and kind of talk about things, and she's going to express not liking the things that I'm saying. So she's going to be very, very theatrical with things, and just very taken by the fact that I'm giving a real clinical advice and experience, and highlighting what autism really looks like and how it's treated. And it is not relative to what is said on YouTube or social media.
Speak to that, girl, and why there are 3 levels. You are correct.
Okay, I apologize.
That's okay. Level 1 would be say Asperger's, right? That's the more mild disorder, right? And level 3 would be the more pervasive disorder, right? The one that needs the most assistance, and would for sure be diagnosed at a very early stage. They used to believe, again, like I said, back when I was in grade school, they believed that generally girls didn't get autism, and if they did.
Now, as she continues to speak, she's speaking of a perspective from her own experience, which may not necessarily be indicative of other people who have autism. There's certain people who have autism who have had great treatment and support. Then you have others that may have not been great. And then you have those who probably totally ignored. But she speaks from a position of her own experience and looking at things from a lens that is exclusive to her, not other people. And when you're talking about a mental illness, you have to look at things from a broader standpoint. But let's continue.
It was only level 3. It was the most pervasive, the most severe. Right. And it's because, again, your ability to communicate, right? Your ability to say, for example, use melodic speech would be a key element, right? And so because girls are socialized differently, because their brains work slightly differently, they often can do that, even though they're level 1 or level 2.
Another thing that I wanted to talk about that you brought up was that I found it concerning that she made an attempt to give descriptive language of how different males and females who have the same illness, particularly or disorder such as autism, how they behave. And unfortunately, working in clinical environments, I have never heard any mental health professional focus on males with autism working. I mean, males with autism focusing in a certain way, and males, I'm sorry, females with autism are behaving in a way that's different from males, and vice versa. And unfortunately, on YouTube, and particularly in this particular space that has a red pill relationship related mindset and gender war, type of texture, that was prominent in her language. But let's continue.
Two, even they often can do that. And so when you're working in a system that already doesn't believe that you could be autistic, then what ends up happening is, despite all of the autism signs screaming in your face, you are being evaluated, and you are creating a problem with a capital P. And I went to a very we'll say high class, like really high attention type of school. And like at one point they were investigating my parents. I think it was second grade, first, second, third grade, around then, because it was like, there's got to be something wrong with her, right? Maybe she's being abused, maybe whatever.
Again, she continues to speak on her own experience instead of focusing on autism spectrum disorder.
This is not normal. She has a genius level IQ, right? She's a very sweet girl sometimes, and then sometimes this happens, and they have no explanation for this behavior. And so they're thinking, well, okay, kids only act out like that if they're being abused at home, or if this, or if that, right? But unfortunately, obviously, none of that was true. I wasn't. I mean, I was being like, my parents were really being investigated by, like, social workers were coming to the house and stuff. Like, they actually had a separate social worker at the school for years, my grade school, just for me, for the problem that is Ruby. No one quite solved it, unfortunately. But it was actually me speaking about that, and just very specifically kind of outlining some of the issues in the first, second, third grade, and my perceptions or misperceptions socially is actually, I was having a discussion much like this, only with a different therapist, and they asked me after the conversation had been over if I had ever been evaluated at phrasing. I'm like, no, not me. So that was actually, and that was 5 years ago. And so from there, I was like, no, that couldn't be me. I appreciate what you're saying. And so, well, just take a look at the information again. Listen, I'm a researcher, right? In psychology, neuroscience, and behavior. I would know, and it's not me. So that's where I started, right? So on one side, I'm going to have to disagree with.
Again, she's focusing on what she thinks about herself, which to me signifies attempting to self-diagnose yourself instead of focusing on a competent mental health professional doing so. And now she's going to state why she disagrees with me.
Derell, especially when we're talking about girls in particular. But I think there's a part of me that does agree with Derell to say that you would have symptoms, and all of your symptoms would be present from early childhood. Right? They just might not be understood as what they are, right? So there's a lot of people, a lot of women who were not diagnosed when they were younger. And again, they did very stereotypical stimming. They had really stereotypical PDA type responses or whatever, but they were always thought to be, it must be something else, because why? Girls don't really get autism. And so, if Derell is from a place that 20 years ago was already in the know, and you're like, no, actually it's pretty equal, the prevalence of autism in girls and boys. That's awesome, right? But many of us, me being included, were not in an area where that was even remotely common thought, which certainly wasn't common in the research.
Again, she's speaking from her own personal experience as someone diagnosed with autism instead of approaching this as the neurobehavioral researcher that she claims to be. If I was diagnosed with any mental health disorder and I was at a speaking engagement, presentation, or what have you among colleagues and other professionals, it is not professional, and it would not show a level of competency to speak on yourself. You're speaking of the illness, not yourself experiencing the illness.
Make that statement 30 years ago. So, and that's where a lot of people fell through the cracks and didn't get a diagnosis earlier in childhood, is because of those prevailing beliefs that were against girls having autism to begin with.
Fair enough. Derell, you have anything to respond to that, or?
Yeah, I'm just going to be honest. I've never heard anything in regards to, even though I will say that when it comes to the diagnoses of autism, just like some other disorders, there has a tendency for males to be diagnosed or misdiagnosed with certain illnesses. And I would say to some effect, boys showing certain behaviors and certain markers would draw the attention of that.
What would be some of these markers and behaviors for men or boys?
They would be consistent with the symptoms of what the DSM says, as far as the sensory, as it relates to smell, as it relates to being nonverbal or difficulty being verbal, hyperactivity to a certain extent, just a lack of understanding not verbal, but social cues. But I don't see
That's like 80% of the red pill manosphere. Then what are we talking about?
No. I'm talking about. I'm looking at DSM. I don't know anything about that, but okay.
You said social awareness. I'm like, okay. I thought we was going somewhere with that.
No. That could be something else. You understand? They are differential diagnoses where certain symptoms can be similar to others. So that could be a lot of other things, But this is, and I've known Classic Ruby for a while. Okay, and as I'm hearing Classic Ruby talk about her own experience, okay, and I'm listening to her own experience, what could be different from somebody else's experience. And I'm not saying she's not correct, and she is stated she's a behavioral nurse, psych nurse per se, training, we train in
psychology, neuroscience, and behavior.
Okay, neuroscience and behavior researcher, great. And so I see this a lot in the field, Great Pill, and this happens to clinicians too. And as a person who has produced and has taught and supervised well over 100 therapists, particularly in our community, most were mainly, I say 80% were women, 20% were probably men, and then I produced, I've taught as a supervisor. There are a healthy percentage of people who come into the field who have some level of mental illness or some form of diagnosis. And one of the main problems that I encountered is that, and this is something that a psychologist that I worked under, who made me more aware of this as I would go to him as far as mentorship and so on, is that there was a tendency for people who were diagnosed, whether they had major depression, any type of, major depression, bipolar disorder, or a personality disorder, they would some way take in the information, the education that they received in understanding their own illness, and they would project that into their patients. They would project that into other people. They would project that into an understanding that may deviate from, because there's still, even though you're looking at things and you got the information, that there's a level of subjectivity that kicks in and biasness because you're looking at merely your experience.
Okay, you're talking about the doctor diagnosing the patient?
No, I'm talking about the clinician, whether you're, no matter what level, as a mental health professional, period, who has a illness, mental health illness, and particularly in their training or things that they're doing, there is instances that have occurred, and I've seen this happen repetitively, where, again, if you're diagnosed with something, you start seeing your clients through yourself and start giving them diagnoses or saying that they have things and things that relate to you.
Yeah,
or
that sound like a weird, screwed up doctor, and then at the same time,
I'm not gonna say they're weird. No, I'm not gonna say they're weird. I think that's a poor choice of word. I just think that
fair. Okay,
but what I will say is that they are in some way still learning their own journey, and it's hard for them to departmentalize themselves from their profession. And so
the doctors.
No, not only doctors, I said mental health professionals, period. That goes for researchers, psych nurses, behavioral techs, therapists, social workers.
So that way I'm like diagnosing.
No, I didn't say that.
Really have, even though I didn't.
I didn't say that.
Or do I work in this area?
Again, Miss Classic Ruby is triggered again, but here we go. I didn't say that. Did you say that?
That's what you're intimating.
No, that's not what I'm intimating.
I'm autistic, not an idiot.
I'm basing things based on clinical experience.
Mm-hmm. But again, you're trying to apply it to me.
This has nothing to do with my opinion. My opinion means nothing.
Why you added in research?
No. I'm basing. Listen, I'm being consistent with the DSM-5 TR. Okay, well, I have. This is no personal in anything, but what I'm telling you, as a person who has trained, particularly therapists, I've had contracts with U of H. I've had contracts with Texas A&M. I've had contracts with University of Texas. I have trained professionals that were psych nurses working at my facility, which is an intensive outpatient program. I also provide case management, all different types of services. I have my company has a vast amount of services that it provides to the community. And it's attractive to students who are in training. And so some of these students and even the professors that work for me have had a propensity to see the client through themselves. Matter of fact, one of the classic examples I had of is I had a white female therapist who was diagnosed with PTSD about 10 years before she decided to become a therapist. Every client that she saw, she had a caseload of about 20 people. Every last one of those clients, when we had a treatment, she said something as it relates to PTSD that was not conducive to the behavior of that client. And some of these clients had, reputable, bona fide diagnoses, and she, for some reason, linked that. And so we had to do one-on-one sessions of looking at, legitimizing the fact that, the current diagnosis is not relative to what you're saying based on what you're thinking and what you're feeling, based on some issues and work that you need to do for yourself to separate yourself from your client. And listen,
but wouldn't that be a problem with that, again, with that physician though? That's one person. No,
you're saying no. We're not talking about. I said I'm not just talking about physicians. I'm talking about all levels of as far as profession. I'm talking about psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists, social workers, behavioral psych nurses, researchers, behavioral techs, and other direct care staff. I'm talking about period. I'm talking about.
So how would I go about looking and vetting through these different type of professional people? How can people
as a client, as a future client? Okay. Yes. So for and I've actually done videos on this and looking for a licensed clinician. Okay. Looking for a licensed therapist. And so what I would say, I've separated it out based on the highest to the smallest. Let's say you're a person who, let's say you're suffering from anxiety, you're suffering from depression, you have signs in which your symptoms in itself are hindering you from working, hindering you from socializing. You're not taking care of yourself physically like you once was. Let's say you're in risk of losing your job. You become somewhat suicidal or things of that sort. Like say things that are really, really hindering your ability to function and do everyday things that you typically would do, to the point where you're isolating yourself or it's being noticeable to other people. In that sense, I would say you may need some medication, and the only profession within that can provide that is a psychiatrist. I would say you need to go to a psychiatrist, and in conjunction to you going to a psychiatrist, they're probably going to refer you to seek a psychologist or a master's level therapist to provide psychotherapy for you. That's typically. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, but because I'm pretty much like the lame corny guy that like basic. So where do I go exactly to get the help I need? Because I might self-diagnose myself like, hey, maybe I got autism. I don't know. So where would I need to go to find a professional? And also, how would I need to vet this person out? Because you said consistent. There's people that will see themselves in me. They might love me, like yo.
Well, but again, that's not average. That's a small minority. I'm just using that as an example of situations in which that occurred. The average therapist is not walking in here doing this type of thing. But I'm saying that there are examples, and
So
there
how do we weed them out? How do we vet?
So within you vetting, okay, a lot of therapists will, particularly like if you're using a mental health resource, or you can call your insurance, you can go on Psychology Today or any other counseling or mental health related. You can go to the ACA, you can go to the American Psychological Association, and also the American Association for Social Work. You can find and get an array of information that they can provide you that can so you can make the best choice for yourself. Now, in you contacting the particular private practice or agency or wherever you choose to get your treatment, the first thing I would tell you to do is look at their credentials. Okay. And once you look at their credentials, look at their expertise as far as the modalities that they provide, and also the list of specialties that they have that relates to your issues. Let's say you're coming in because you are finding that you're seeing or hearing things. Let's say you have some level of psychosis. Okay. If you look at that person's page or that person's information, if they don't say something as it relates to psychosis related disorders or schizophrenia, things of that sort, then if they don't say that, then that may not be the type of therapist you need. Okay. But if it does say that relates to you, then that would be somebody that you may want to call and talk to them about, because they actually have experience treating that type of client per se. So that's the first part. Now, once you get to the next phase of calling them, setting up a consultation, they may give you a 15-minute consultation. I'm just tipping, some don't. For me, myself, I may do a 15-minute consultation over the phone. I don't do because I don't do consultations face to face anymore. I kind of stopped doing that. But in a consultation, that's your opportunity, Gray Pill, to ask questions, to see if you'll be a good fit, to see if they are exhibiting behaviors that you find uncomfortable, because there is a such thing as transference and countertransference, which relates to how you see them or how they see you. That person may remind you of somebody you don't like, or you may remind them of somebody. That could be something where you're just not gelling correctly within the initial therapeutic process. So you have the opportunity to ask questions, to observe what you're seeing, and see if you can be comfortable in the therapeutic process of gaining. So at this point, I'm pretty much highlighting someone who is wanting mental health services and how to seek those services, how to vet a professional to see if they're a great fit for you for whatever services that you need. I'm clearly speaking from a perspective of working in various mental health facilities, including my own private practice and businesses and other services that I provide, programs within the scope of my particular agency. So I was making Great Pill podcast be aware of that in case he or anybody else would be interested in mental health services, and they will understand what the process is in treatment and developing coping skills or whatever your goals are within your treatment plan to get where you need to be. So that's what I would advise someone to do if you're trying to vet to get the right person.
And that's 15 minutes of a
person.
Well,
it all depends. It all depends on 15. Usually some may do 30 minutes. But I'm gonna say 30 minutes. You can do a 30-minute consultation per se.
And they'll figure out within 15, because
they're not figuring. No, listen, that's you seeing if you're comfortable with the person. They're not going to figure anything out in 30 minutes. Okay. That's just for you to choose. That's more for you, not for the therapist. That's for you to determine if I want to continue the therapeutic relationship.
And then they're going to reschedule. Then they're going to reschedule another time to see me even more.
Yeah, yes. They're going to schedule to see you again. Now, in most situations, we're looking at the assessment phase. Now, for me, when I see a client, and I kind of saw it when she kind of talked about, depending on who you see, like a psychologist may want to do a full battery examination on you or something like that. They could be 4 to 5. They're going to do a battery of testing. Some do different. For myself, I may do a mental status exam, and I may do what's called a psychosocial assessment that may take an hour, hour and a half to 2 hours, in which I will highlight and ask you a host of questions that would detail your whole life up into the present, in which we will talk about things as it relates to your education, your schooling, any social issues with family, medical issues that can induce or affect your mental illness, things of that sort. We're going to ask whether or not you've had a criminal history, any violent tendency. It's just going to ask a whole host of questions that involve your whole life. And in that, along with any other information, like say if you've seen another therapist or someone else, we can take that mental health history and make a determination of how we're going to formulate your treatment. Okay, it's that assessment phase. Depending on who you see, it could be kind of lengthy. And then after that, once that person decides, and she even said, she mentioned it could take 1 or 2. They can actually spread it up into 2 days, multiple days. That's true. That can happen depending on the situation, depending on what's going on with you, the extent, the severity of it, and your functional level. It's not necessarily about the diagnosis, it's how you're functioning with the diagnosis. Some people function, better than others. It all depends on the situation. So with that being said, once that treatment plan is made for yourself, once that the therapist gets a kind of a snapshot of who you are and based on what you present, the information that's collected, they're going to create a treatment plan for you, and then they're going to go about this, implementing whatever therapeutic techniques or school of thought that they typically use, and they're going to utilize that to help you with whatever issues that you have.
All right, fair enough. Wes?
Okay. I just explained the process, not to say it was short, simple, and sweet, but I stated in a manner to help people understand if you are seeking a therapist for whatever reasons, this may be the process. And every therapist is different, but for the most part, this is what you'll have to deal with.
Ruby? There's a lot, Wes. You have anything, Wes?
Based on your age, based on your environment, there's also environmental factors, there are genetic factors that contribute to that. So I would be very suspicious of a doctor that saw a kid for 30, 45 minutes or whatever and just give them a quick diagnosis of autism. That to me is that was poor services. That was actually a poor exercise of his profession. A battery of testing, such as the autism quotient, that's several assessments that are used. And I'm also not only just the assessment itself, but you also got to look at the behavioral observations that are taking place in the home environment and in the school environment or whatever our environments that child is operating in. You also have to take into account what you're observing. So it's extensive, and it should be, because you don't want to just slap a diagnosis on somebody and it's wrong, or you put it, and I've seen tons of misdiagnoses, tons of it. I've seen kids misdiagnosed. Ruby talked earlier about people malingering and things of that sort. That happens. And I'm gonna be honest, a lot of psychologists usually ignore that. And I actually had issues with a guy that I worked with that actually was a partner of mine before we actually, kind of went away. But I was doing Social Security assessments and I was mainly doing Social Security assessments for people who had a mental illness or they were being evaluated. We were doing a full battery exam. We were doing all of that. And we were doing objective testing. The psychologist did he did the projective testing, because as a master's level clinician, we're not allowed to do the projective stuff, the interpreting stuff. But I clearly told him, I say, hey, this kid, I think he's pretending to be sick or to have an illness en route to getting these benefits. And a lot of clinicians, they overlook that and just say, we just want you to report what you observe. Just report what you observe. Do not question. And I don't know, that's, as a psychologist, that's maybe how they're trained. I know, as far as my training, it was kind of similar to that. but they just say just report what you are told. Just if they were you ask them a question, just document the answer. Don't go into the question. Don't go into changing up your body position, facial expressions, things of that sort, because that can kind of alter how they feel when you're asking. Like, you know, just report what you hear.
Not if you gaslight them.
Well, I can't gaslight in an assessment. That's predetermined questions.
Okay.
Yeah, uniform questions, you know.
Okay. What about silly question. What about genetics? Is that a genetic thing? Like, hey, I have it. Okay.
Yeah, genetics can play a big role. And I'm gonna say this is another thing, and this is one of the biggest. I almost stopped providing services to autistic kids, particularly children. And I actually had an issue with a medical doctor in regards to this. And so I'm gonna say this: when I first entered the field of counseling and mental health, there was not a large population of autistic children. It wasn't. Something happened between 2003. No, I'm gonna say 2000, somewhere around 2000 to 2008. There was a huge projection of more kids being diagnosed with autism. In the 80s and 90s, from what I've gathered from professionals that are older and have more experience, there were not a lot of kids diagnosed with autism. And maybe there should have been more, because maybe the assessment and appraisal tools were not there yet. Maybe the training for it was not up to par.
Or it could be a lack of awareness of parents too, because I don't want to say back in my day, but I just remember the 70s, 80s, and 90s. We had, like, even the technology and media itself, like we didn't have a lot of access to a lot of things. So it was more like, hey, we just get outside, play. So in my upbringing, the message was the kids was out of sight, out of mind. So the parents was happy. You know, if they knew their kid was hanging out with the neighbor next door, the parent were like, okay, well, I'm at work from 9 to 5. I'm good, because I know I assume that kid is good. Now, if the kid come home, I think Ruby mentioned earlier, like if the kid got good grades, hey, the parents like, oh, I did my job. The kid got A's, nothing, no fuss, no fuss. If the kid was like, because I feel like
I'm hearing what Great Pill is saying, and he's asking good questions, but I'm more in line with focusing on what really happens for the most part on average, not exceptional things. But let's continue. We're going to get back to classic Ruby.
That's why I said this a lot. Give her some guilt to this.
Explanation, especially if your kid overall is doing well, like you said, in certain areas, right? So, like, again, I had like a really high IQ. I was not doing well in school at all, but I had a very high IQ.
Again, she's focused on herself and not the characteristics of the illness.
You know, I had moments of brilliance in school, at least, but I was not doing well generally. But you know, the thing is I was a Black kid in an almost entirely white neighborhood in a pretty much entirely white school, and my parents were very young, and so they were very afraid of me being labeled, and then that taking away opportunities I got because of the good label. I already had a good label. They didn't want the good label, right, genius, to be overridden by something that everyone basically associated with, like, you know, subpar levels of IQ. It's almost like the two things would cancel each other out. And so I think because of those fear levels, anyone mentioned, especially in the 90s, right? In the 80s and the 90s, someone mentioned something like that about your kid. There's no way, especially in a place like this, because you did see a lot of the 2% of Black kids falling through the cracks, or you know, being I'm going to say.
I have to stop here to also preface the fact that she made this about a racial situation based on her experience growing up in Canada. And I am one to say that there are a lot of racial events that do occur with kids or adults, or racism hindering the ability of Black people to obtain mental health services. That definitely is present. However, to me, it was irrelevant. She made it relevant, or tried to attempt to make it relevant, when we were strictly, again, talking about autism. And she used her own experience, again, not drawing from the fact that we're talking in general of the illness, not discrediting or discounting the racism that she experienced or other, you know, the lack of proper treatment, but it has nothing to do with the illness itself by definition.
Misdiagnosed or judged unfairly, labeled unfairly when, you know, they just needed like a little bit, a tiny bit more help than maybe some other kid or whatever. And it's just like, and we were in French immersion also, which kind of made it difficult because it meant that a lot of things that maybe socially you might be able to pick on from reading stories or whatever, my parents wouldn't be able to do because all of my stories were in French. Everything I was writing was in French. It was on the teacher to care. So if the teacher doesn't care, and the teacher doesn't pick up on it because the teacher has already stereotyped you as being a Black kid who is a problem, because Black kids are problems. That's what's wrong with them. They have behavioral issues because they're Black. Especially if you're in an all-white school with a bunch of French people. I'm so serious. So I think there's a lot of challenges sometimes to, I will say, Black children in particular, especially in demographics like what I was born and raised into, getting not just the proper diagnoses,
also low class.
proper,
I'm gonna throw it in there too. Low class also.
Yeah, low class as well. But I'll say low class, everyone is just not getting the proper support and proper diagnoses and proper aftercare and whatever, right? In my school, like I said, they pulled out all the stops. They had money to have a social worker in the school to watch me for years. Just me. I was the problem, right? So that's how much money this school had, right? But at the same time, it's like, if I was a white kid who had a genius level IQ and was really sweet and da 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 da, and then there was just these times sometimes that I would react in a way they just didn't understand, and my reactions were really, really big. And if you listen to what I was saying, it was a very strong sense of, I felt like I was like, there's a strong sense of justice in there, right? I always felt like you were really just doing something wrong, and I just felt like it was unfair, and I didn't understand why it was happening, and whatever. If someone had heard me, and if I was like a little white kid, they might have, right? But because I was a Black kid, they had already decided. I have young parents who, my mom was a teen when, I was born, and my young parents were already separated. And I was in a neighborhood where everyone's parents were still together, right? Except for the other Black kid in my class who also had a single mom. My parents were both raising me, but they were apart. And so they had all these things they could blame it on, right? I'm a problem because I have teen parents who are Black, and da da da. And this is how Black people are. I mean, come on, look at them. Most of them are in the ghetto anyway. These are the things that were,
again, this whole monologue is deviating from the illness itself. She almost used this as a way to express all the inequities that occurred to her throughout her school days, her education in grade school, middle school, and et cetera, high school, I guess, whatever the system in Canada is. I'm here strictly to talk about autism. She basically highlighted her whole life and the issues of dealing with autism and the lack of proper resources.
really happening, right? And so these are the stereotypes that a lot of people are fighting. And so my best friend, her son was born at 24 weeks. He was like literally like this big. It was insane. And all through his early childhood, they tried to label him, put him in the special school constantly, right? He's like 11 now, and still, and it's like you have to fight constantly against it, because as soon as a Black child in particular shows the littlest bit of deviation from what you're hoping they do or what you're expecting them to do, or da 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 da, they don't try to find another explanation for why this kid trusts every single person in this room like they're all equal, right? Let's just label them with ADHD. Let's just label them with autism. Let's just label them with something. And then there you go. That's our excuse to throw them away somewhere, right? And so you see that a lot happen also. So I do think that we did have, especially in the Black community, we did have a lot of over labeling of Black boys, right? But while we were over labeling Black boys, we were misdiagnosing Black girls often as well. So I think there are a lot of issues. I think either way, though, being somewhere like Canada helps, because we have socialized healthcare, right? Free healthcare, for lack of better words, right? We also have a systemic way of dealing with things. So it's not on individual therapists, right?
she wanted to highlight the fact that they have socialized medicine or free healthcare, but her position clearly states that although they have socialized medicine or socialized healthcare, it was not effective medicine or effective healthcare services. And then she tried to take a jab at me of talking about just an individualized therapist with an individualized position. And so again, she came out of character, and it just slowly built into what erupted into a debate or a argument or clashing of two later on. But let's continue.
Right? Individual practitioners to diagnose people. In fact, you can as an individual practitioner, but then your responsibility as an individual practitioner is to send them to, like, say, for example, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, or that's a big hotel downtown Toronto, and whatever, and for them to get an official assessment, an official diagnosis, right? Like I said, the 5 axes, I was talking to you guys about that. And so there's a standard, right? So it's not just on one person, on some school psychologist to diagnose your kid, or, you know, this random place to diagnose your kid. No, like there's a really systemic standard that, you know, they uphold, and they do that by kind of taking the, you know, thousands and thousands of people who are psychiatrists or psychologists or therapists, like, no, there's a standard over here, and you've got to send your kid over here. You got to send your teen or your adult over here to get an official diagnosis. And you know that if your kid gets that diagnosis, if you're as an adult, you get a diagnosis through somewhere like CAMH, then you know that your symptomology is in line with other people who have that diagnosis, and there's no way that bias could have come in there to play like a role to, like, you know, say label you, or, you know, systematically try to like label you something, you know, have or whatever. So
fair enough, because that was pretty much my mindset. Like, I know Derell was saying his experience, like, it just be a couple of, hey, what's going on, Mandrell? Appreciate you, Mandrell.
I think as far as
women have different brains, bro, because
probably a little bit more aggressive than the girls were. The girls
Let's
were probably a little bit more
aggressive.
stationary. As far as the weight, do the waving of the hand or some repetitive gestures, pretty much the same. I just seen the boys do it a little bit more aggressive.
Okay.
So at this point, he asked me a question about the gender differences in a girl having autism and a boy. And I'm gonna admit, boys are 3 to 4 times more likely to be diagnosed with autism because they are exhibiting those symptoms of you know, ineffective communication by way of being nonverbal or understanding verbal cues, social situation, gestures, short range of understanding relationships and engaging, things of that sort. And girls are least likely to do that. Okay. So I'm going to go on about the differences, which I feel they're not significant differences. What I have found is that as far as being nonverbal autistic children, I've seen that more prominent in boys than girls. Things of that sort, as far as the nonverbal or as far as the verbal, the girls were more verbal on average. I've seen that, but other than that, I never seen like the overall within the context of the features that make up autism spectrum disorder. They exhibited pretty much the same things. It's just that the boys were probably a little bit more intense and physical with things, you know, than the girls. And I want to ask, you know, like, have you ever heard of applied behavioral analysis, ABA therapy?
No.
Okay. ABA therapy is a lot of observation and implementation of behavioral strategies and things as far as the observation and repetitiveness of different things, looking at the sensory and things of that sort to try to help them function in their environment. I'm not an expert on that, on ABA therapy. I've had some, as far as the education, as far as me being clinically supervised to do it, I never really did it. I did a lot of behavioral therapy, which is a little different. ABA therapy has a lot more structure and time-related things that involve that. behavioral therapy doesn't have. So I don't want to go, but I threw that out as for those who are listening, just for educational purposes. And part of what we spoke of as far as how people looked at things from the 70s, 80s, and 90s is basically a lack of psychoeducation, which is a problem in our community. There's a lack of psychoeducation that allows people to understand mental illness and to get rid of the fallacies and get rid of the myths of mental health altogether. So a lot of this that happens is particularly with boys or girls being misdiagnosed or lack of diagnosis. It deals with the fact of how people look at mental health, period. And the fact of the matter, in the Black community itself, we're dismissive of that. So that's more of a demographic issue. And even now, it's a lot better now than it was years ago, but there's still strides that have to be had. So a lot of that behavior is culturally influenced by the fact of how we have been raised and how our perception of mental illness was taught to us. As far as you seeking these services mean that you're crazy or you're out of your mind, and it doesn't necessarily mean it. It means that you have a condition that is hindering you from functioning at a higher level. And
that's true, because we're pushing.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Because we're pushing the because it used to be, if you was weird, you was like Lily cast out. So now the positive motto is like weird is the new norm now.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely agree with that.
So when I look at observation of girls and boys, and I'm gonna be honest, most of the autistic children that I saw were actually boys. They were not girls. I had a few. There were more. I would say it was probably 70% boys and 30% girls. For the most part, they were mostly boys. They were not girls. So I do think that there is a legitimate concern about maybe girls not being, as far as the awareness of the behavior of girls, in a sense, that may exhibit it, but we can see that because the girls are maybe not more, the behaviors are not aggressively apparent, where it grasps your attention, and because the boys are more aggressive, it tends to have your attention. There's a sense of, I would say, apathy, but a sense of just not thinking there's a problem and thinking that, like she said, oh, she's just thinking, or she's just, in her own world, or, saying things like that. And you're not necessarily giving them the attention that they need.
Yeah. So that's to kind of go back to what we were saying earlier about, so it's kind of if the woman or the female has less signs showing it, that doesn't necessarily mean it's not there. So
right. Yes. Can I say something really quickly?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so a lot of neurotypical people, or just people who don't have a particular disorder, when they're evaluating people who do have the disorder, they're normally evaluating it based on observable behavior or how someone makes them feel.
Now, I totally disagree with this from a person who has never evaluated anybody, has never been trained to do it, and has never done it with a lack of supervision of someone who's actually licensed or certified. And so the issue that I have with her as a neurobehavioral researcher is that she's strictly looking at things from a research perspective and an academic perspective, theoretically speaking, but not necessarily from a practical and application standpoint. And so what she's saying is from a place of never actually engaging in these types of professional activities and duties, or having the skill to do so, but strictly from a research information gathering perspective.
Right. So, for example, if you were observing a young boy versus a young girl who are both level 1, so that's like high functioning autistic, right? You would probably more likely notice the symptoms from the young boy. Right. And the reason why you would notice is not even necessarily because some of the behavior, they tend to be a little bit more loneristic, right? Because girls and boys socialize differently at that age. And they little boys put less importance on social play than little girls do. And I'm saying not just autistic boys, just boys in general. And so autistic girls tend to be surrounded by other girls who really care about social play. And so they will, in essence, act like mentors. They will say, hey, come, I'm going to lead you down the path of righteousness and tell you how to behave. And autistic girls desperately need that. I had one every year. And no matter how problematic I was, my first grade, I had one friend.
Again, she was doing really well by focusing on the research, focusing on the overall information as it relates to that particular illness and specialty of treating it and the information about it. And then she begins to circle it back towards herself, which is a mistake.
Marley McPherson. Second grade, Katie Green. I could tell you all their names, right? Because it was just like the one person almost like took pity on me and was willing to look past some of the more abnormal or outrageous things that I did and look at the person within kind of thing. And then I'm going to teach you how to behave like a human. And so, but boys don't tend to have that, nor do they have that necessity, because boys are okay with individualized play, right?
That is not true. That is grossly not true. Boys have issues with individualized play just like anyone else. Boys want to play just like girls. They want to be able to have the ability to have kids to be friends with, engage with. Boys and girls both, when they have autism, have difficulty interacting with other kids. And she focused so much on the gender differences and focusing on herself. She just missed the whole point of being here, was to talk about autism in itself, absent of her experience with autism. And she just was unable to do so.
Spectra.
Wait, I get that. I know that. But I'm just saying, on average, most autistic people that I've seen, they're not sociable people. They're not.
Go to therapy.
Concern about maybe girls not being see
like two peas in a pot. So when I say ask, I keep my eye on the words a little bit, because that's why
I see
intense in what way? Like West holding his chin.
Like the boys were probably a little bit more aggressive than the girls were. The girls were probably a little bit more stationary. As far as the weight, do the waving of the hand or some repetitive gestures, pretty much the same. I just seen the boys do it a little bit more aggressive.
Okay.
What I have found is that as far as being nonverbal autistic children, I've seen that more prominent in boys than girls. Things of that sort, as far as the nonverbal or as far as the verbal, the girls were more verbal on average. I've seen that, but other than that, I never seen like the overall within the context of the features that make up autism spectrum disorder. They exhibited pretty much the same things. It's just that the boys were probably a little bit more intense and physical with things, than the girls. And I want to ask, like, have you ever heard of applied behavioral analysis, ABA therapy?
No.
Okay. ABA therapy is a lot of observation and implementation of behavioral strategy and implementing services to help them thrive.
Not sociable people.
Okay.
So what I'm asking you,
no, I didn't.
Spectra
Wait,
for 150 days of the school year. That's what you try to do. You try to learn how to make other people comfortable so you're not a problem, so you can fit in, so you can have friends, so you can stop failing socially, right? And so, but boys don't necessarily, because their play is different and because their socialization is different earlier, by the time they start really caring, that people don't kind of gravitate towards them or, kind of freaked out by them or whatever, they have no idea why. right? I knew the things that were wrong because I was being told constantly from the time I was 4, 5, 6 by my peers, right? But since boys don't get that same feedback, they're like 11, 12, 13. There's no way they got to 13 and no one on a teacher level, on a parent level noticed, right? Because no one is coaching them behind the parents' back, behind the adults' backs. So they're just going to stand out more and more like a sore thumb, and it's going to be more and more problematic for them, and that's normally how we end up sending kids for assessments and diagnoses to begin with, right? It's because they're having a pervasive problem socially, educationally, something. And we recognize like there's enough of a problem that there might be something underlying this. Let's send them for an assessment, right? Whereas in girls are less likely to start suffering to an extent that it's like, okay, I don't know what to do anymore until like teenagehood, because that's when there's a lot of extra social pressures. People stop wanting to baby their girlfriends and stuff like that. It's every man for themselves once you get to like girl world in high school, right? And so that's when they tend to start really struggling, and that's when they start sticking out like a sore thumb. But again, girls are already socialized to kind of shut up, right? They're not socialized necessarily to make it in your face. They're more likely just quietly drop out of school at 15 or 16 or whatever. They're more likely to just quietly not show up for 150 days of the school year. And then when you're yelling at them in the office, they just don't really respond, right? They're just more likely to kind of be non-confrontational about it, to be really avoidant about it and whatever. Whereas in boys are unlikely to even get to that level. But if they did, boys are a little bit more, as Derell said, they're a little bit more, we'll say, aggressive, right? A little bit more in your face, a little bit more creating enough of a problem in your face that, again, you're going to notice as a teacher, as an administrator, there's something off here. We should do something about it. So
Derell, so the men, the more aggressive, they're masking it.
On average. I'm gonna say, I'm not gonna say on every occurrence, but on average, because I don't want to look at things from a generalized standpoint.
No, that's fair. So that's fair. I'm generalizing. So with that being said, so generally speaking, so more aggressive masculine. So does that mean Myron Game that's a homosexual? Does that mean that he's
spectrum?
Wait.
To hyper focus on attractiveness. So if you are beautiful or you've got the
So now we're going to talk about the issues of autistic children, or autistic adults dating. So we kind of transferred to that, and she definitely didn't agree with what I was saying.
Myron is not autistic. He's just sexually frustrated, immature.
Dating. You're just not. If you're a girl, right? But as a guy, there's a lot more to it than that, right? When you're younger, you don't really have money, so therefore what you're going to need to rely on is swag or social currency. And if you're autistic, you likely have little to none.
Now.
I'm gonna be honest with you. Most of the adult males that I had that most were autistic, they didn't have a lot of interest in dating. Period.
What ages was these? The ones
I'm saying between 18 to maybe 30.
Really?
Yeah, and you should have saw the look on her face. She was very, very shocked and very, I guess, offended that I, again, using my clinical experience with having multiple clients a year with autism as adults. Many of these kids did not have, or younger adults did not have relationships. Some were dating, but they were more focused on social skills and dealing with the issues of struggling with autism and other mental health issues that were comorbid to autism. They would talk about wanting to maybe interact with friends and hang out, maybe date, but it was not a prominent concern to have a long-term relationship or have a girlfriend. Although some did mention that, but that was not the primary thing. And most enjoy doing things by themselves, such as playing video games, such as reading, such as riding a bicycle or driving it or fixing things and things that they were actually good at, being on using computers. They talked about the enjoyment of interacting maybe with a small group of people that they're familiar with and doing recreational activities alone. I'm not saying every therapist would say the same thing in their experience with treating people with adults with autism, but that was my experience overall. They didn't have a lot of interest in dating. They were not very sociable people. Period. I've never met anybody with autism that was highly sociable, even the mild ones.
There's multiple TV shows of real autistic people who are really dating. Love on the Spectrum.
Now, her this to me was, oh my God, I just shook my head like, okay, now obviously you're not qualified to have this conversation with me when you're using a social media reality show to combat what I'm saying about my own clinical experience, and you're going to use something, a contrived, organized, setting, superficial show with cameras and actors and predetermined written scenarios as evidence of autistic adults being more sociable. Like, Ruby, come on, you're showing that you're definitely losing me and anybody that has any credibility in this field, that you should not be talking about this, or at least learn to take yourself out of it and take out your social media experience. Get that? I know that, but I'm just saying, on average, most autistic people that I've seen, whether they're not sociable people. They're not
go to therapy because I'm, bro.
I'm just going to be honest with you. Yeah, I'm not saying that there's not cases of someone autistic of being highly, but then on average they're not. I'm just going to be honest with you. They're not. They're not going to be on. And I know we had a little argument about they're not coming on YouTube to do these things. They may like watching things. They may be stimulated sensory wise to look at things, in different electronic devices and stuff, but they're not going to have a tendency to attract social situations on average.
That's like saying introverted people because they're not sociable, don't want to have relationships.
Unfortunately, I'm not saying it to trigger you. I'm not trying to trigger you. I'm stating
you're not triggering me. It's just the most ridiculous
but you're interrupting me. You're interrupting me. On average, great pill. I'm gonna say this wholeheartedly. I have counseled, as far as most of them were all men, okay, that were, as far as adults with autism that had mild forms of autism. They could work, okay. Some of them tried to go to school and things like that. That they were not people who were putting themselves into social situations wanting to be. They preferred to be by themselves on average. They were not, feeling a lack of discomfort because they were not having a bunch of friends, even though they would like to have people that they could connect to and do things with, but they shied away from extreme social situations. They talked about this a lot in therapy, as far as wishing to have better levels of social interaction to get rid of some of the anxiety. And I understand, as having autism, there's certain symptomology that affects that, but they're not in a sense in which they are drawn to social interaction. And listen, you can disagree, but
I was going to ask you. What about
you're speaking the problem, Ruby? When we talked about autism, I'm speaking of autism. I'm not speaking of myself. A lot of this situation, you're losing credibility because you're speaking more of yourself.
Well, I already made it really clear I'm speaking about myself, but I'm also speaking in general terms.
You're speaking of yourself.
In general terms,
you're not speaking in general terms.
In general terms,
you're speaking in anecdotal, your own experience.
Right. In general terms, though, what is the difference, or is there no difference to you between not finding social situations enjoyable and wanting to avoid a social situation? How is that the same to you as not wanting love or sex from an individual mate?
I don't know what you're talking about, because you're talking about two different things. I'm speaking on autism spectrum disorder.
You said they don't date because they don't want to be social.
I didn't say they don't date. I said many of them did not have the interest.
Right. So you said they don't have the interest because they're not sociable people.
Okay.
So what I'm asking you.
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. See,
okay. What did you
I'm
say?
speaking in clinical, very clinical,
You're
objective. Yes, I'm very. I can show you degrees. I can show you the licenses. I can show you everything.
You're not speaking in
no,
terms.
listen. I am speaking. No, you're speaking from an emotional standpoint. No, you're speaking from an emotional standpoint that's driven by your own experience. I'm speaking
actually, what I did was ask you a question of which you're still not answering. You like to talk in circles instead of just answering the question. So answer the question.
Okay, sir. So as I was stating, when I have encountered adults, mostly with males, like I said, like 70% of my clients that were diagnosed with mild autism spectrum disorder, on the mild, as far as on the spectrum, the mild level, many of them were able to function, have jobs, and do things. Look at what she was doing in the background, making all types of gestures, talking to herself, being very colorful. I mean, this is an adult woman acting like this, and we're trying to have an intellectual conversation. Some of them did date, but on average, they did not have a strong interest or have an interest in dating. Not to say they wasn't attracted to females, not to say that or whatever their sexuality was, but they did not have a strong need to do that. I'm just stating that. That's just from my experience. I'm not saying that there are people who are diagnosed that want to do those things. And see, she's hearing what she wants to hear instead of hearing what I'm actually saying. And so I'm not here to paint everybody in a light. I'm just here specifically talking about over 15, 20 years of doing this and seeing. And look, I don't see a lot of kids with. I'm just gonna say it. Every year, I probably see maybe 3 or 4 kids or adults with autism. The only time I saw a large percentage of people, I had a contract with a home health agency for 2 years where I specifically saw kids that were on the severe, profound level that were nonverbal and they couldn't do a lot of things by themselves. Some of them were able to go to school; they were moderate, and I may have had a few that were on the mild level. Most of them were actually severe and profound. And so that's where I'm speaking of. I'm not speaking just on. I'm speaking of the totality of the levels that characterize the spectrum as a whole, and the differences as far as functionality. Okay. I'm looking at functionality as it involves how they perceive the world, how they socialize within the world, and how they try to become, in order for them to thrive, and implementing services to help them thrive. That's what we're looking at, because a lot of kids, they have issues. If they are verbal, they're not as verbal. Some of them are not as verbal than others. You know, I'm not strictly looking at mild that can basically do a lot more things on average. But I'm doing you a disservice as a clinician to sit here and make these bold statements that are just not consistent with the DSM-5. I'm just not going to do that. I'm just not. But go ahead. Sir.
That's fair enough. So, just the differences between the social cues.
So at this point, I made it, quite clear. And so Miss Ruby decided she's going to show some research because she refused to listen to my clinical experience. And so she goes out to use one research report from Psych Central to make her point.
By is an individual clinician's admittedly limited experience because they're not specialized in this particular area.
20 years
like
experience?
What I go by,
you're
interrupting me. I didn't mean to trigger you, Derell.
You didn't trigger me, but I don't have limited.
I just wanted to listen. You're interrupting, though,
You're taking it personal, Ruby.
No, but you're interrupting, sir. And I just
go ahead. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Okay. So I'm a researcher, and so what I go by, right? I don't go by any individual's experience, including my own, actually. And there are times where I'll refer to how I deviate from the norm, right? So what I go by actually is research and statistics, right? So when they do studies, right, to try to get a bigger picture of the generalized idea or conception of a particular thing, like autism and dating, that would be where I get my numbers from, right? And so you can actually see from the statistics from the research that has been accumulated, right, that like I think like 70 something, over 70% of autistic people are like in some type of romantic relationship. You have 50% or 30% of 30 to 50% depends on which one you're looking at, are interested in getting and staying married for a lifetime. I think 30% of autistic people are actually currently married. Many of the ones that are not married, though, except for those with, obviously pervasive developmental delay, many of them are actually expressing a desire, but it's more like a lack of access or ability to find somebody who wants to marry them, or because of their pervasive need for assistance, they often have some adult person who has some type of conservatorship over them or power of attorney over them, who can
That's
control
true.
whether or not they're allowed to date or they're allowed to marry.
Mhm.
And those parents often permanently infantilize their children, even though these are adult people who have adult interests now and adult desires and whatever, but they see their kid as a kid, and kind of prevent that from happening. And that's why shows like Love on the Spectrum are so important, actually, right? I mean, they're important to people like me, they're important to people like Celine, who has a social developmental disorder, she said, right? And the reason why these are important is because what it's doing is it's taking people other than level ones, right? Other than people who they can mostly kind of fit into society or whatever, right? Taking level 2 and level 3 people often, and it's showing you that no, not only do they desire love, do they desire commitment, do they desire sex and things like normal people, right? But that if you allow them, they'll pursue it, right? And so, and that if you allow them, there are people who are also somewhere, let's say somewhere in the neurodivergent realm, who are hey, yeah, let's date, let's try this out, whatever. And so I think what it is for me, and why I think it's just so ridiculous to make statements about the desire of people who have these types of disorders, is because on one side, right, you have most people with autism have their neurons are firing a lot, which means that they are overstimulated a lot, which means they don't like a lot of things that other people like touch for no reason, for example. But that doesn't mean that they don't desire touch ever, right? Normally it's under very specific situations and blah, blah, blah. And what they really desire is someone who can work with them, right? And this is what ends up happening is when they're given the opportunity, they find someone who can work with them, and then they can get the fulfillment because they do actually desire the fulfillment for the most part. That's what the research shows us, right? But have they had access to that? Have they had the ability to find it anywhere? Do they believe that they even can, when everyone's telling them that if they can't act normal, if they can't act right, then they're never going to get it, especially men? No. So they might not be choosing to pursue it. They might not be in the moment where they're looking for a therapist right now at this moment. They might not be in the moment right now where they're looking for a wife or a husband or whatever, because probably that's why they're pursuing therapies, to become whole and happy and whatever, so that way they can then be ready to continue with the rest of their adult life. But it doesn't mean that on a whole they don't desire those things. And the research tends to show us that they do.
All right, I'll let Derell's respond. Then Wes has a question.
Okay. All I'm gonna say is that I never said that anybody didn't desire anything. I never stated that. I don't know what that monologue was all about. Again, it sounds like you're speaking from a place of trauma personally. And again, as I'm gonna state this, I'm looking at the autism spectrum disorder, all aspects of the disorder, how it presents itself, how it's analyzed, how it's treated, the observable behaviors. And of course, an adult with autism has the same desires as an adult without autism. They're human. But the problem is that in their functioning interaction, to get there, to get relationships and things, there's a lot of other things that, to me, just as there's social cues, and as far as them functioning, there are also issues as it relates to relationships are also just as difficult, or if not more. There are people who have autism, who have families, who have children and relationships. But the reality is that the majority, the research, she said that 70%, every autistic person that I've ever that provided therapy for, none of them was married. None of them were married. Most of them could not make a lot of decisions by themselves. They needed assistance. She talked about conservatorship, which is something that I deal with a lot. So a lot of them lived in group homes, things of that sort, to independent living. I mean, I'm looking at the reality of that, you know, but I'm not saying that there's not instances in which these people have a job, they have a you know, that they're able to live and function just like anybody else. I never stated that, but I'm looking at as far as on occurrences. That's not the typical person that has autism. And she pointed out one research report. And the reason why I came up here, Great Pill, is because this again, in the field of psychology, I'm looking at articles such as on the American Psychological Association, American Counseling, and particularly a recent article that I saw on Psychology Today as it relates to self-diagnosis, as also as it relates to autism. And they reference TikTok. They talked about YouTube too, but they mainly reference TikTok has been a refuge of people saying things and doing things that are not consistent with the DSM. I'm here just to speak on from what's consistent with the field. You can draw whatever the conclusions. Yes, I am just one clinician. Okay,
Right.
I am one, but I also am a clinician who actually, I don't know if anybody else on this panel that has a license. I don't know anybody on this panel who has actually treated people with autism. So I have to stand on that. And I'm not saying that your perception and opinion doesn't matter. I never stated that. But all I'm saying is that, you know, I've actually treated people with this illness. I've actually went out into to their homes. I've went to schools. I've done all of these different things. And I have done great work, good work. And it is difficult work. It is not easy. Look at what she's doing. Look at the play. Look at the immature, you know, facial expressions, just she muting herself, making, you know, her posture and everything. Like she just could not believe that she encountered someone who actually is more intelligent in this area and more knowledgeable and has the experience. I guess she was just somewhat dumbfounded. But hey, this is what it is. That's why this was part of the reason why I came on YouTube in the first place, to properly educate people about mental health. You know, it's not easy work. I'm just going to be honest. So I'm speaking from that place of reference. This is not personal. This is strictly clinical and professional. If you don't agree with it, great. If you don't agree with anything I say, Great Pill, you can go look up the research. You can go look up whatever you want. You can go ask another professional, particularly an ABA, someone that's licensed in ABA or certified in ABA, an ABA therapist,
not a professional,
you know, so forth.
Weird.
You are a researcher,
which is a professional. In fact, I'm going for a PhD,
okay.
so soon I will be
You're
more
taking it
educated
personal.
than you. So literally,
now she's triggered again. But here we go.
Definition,
you don't know how educated
I'm
I
a
am.
professional in the exact same area, in the
I'm
exact same arena.
I'm not going to get in an argument with you.
And a larger range of things.
Have you treated someone with autism? No, you haven't.
Actually, literally, I have. Literally,
how?
Literally
with what license? What license do you have?
You do know that literally in order
what license do you have?
In order for you to get,
you know what? I don't know the rules in Canada.
Masters, you have to do
I don't know the rules.
You know that, right?
I don't know the rules.
You know that, right?
I don't know the rules in Canada. So excuse me if I don't know the rules.
Do you not know that? Okay.
Do you have a license?
You don't know that. So maybe you don't.
Do you have a license?
Do you have
I didn't say a master, a person's unlicensed couldn't do things.
It's okay for you to not have all the information in the world, but for you,
I didn't say I did.
But for you to think,
you're coming off very sophomoric right now. You really are.
In psychology,
this is not personal.
When my education level is actually, well, it's a little bit higher than yours because you stopped at MA, right? And so if you don't seem to understand how that hierarchy of psychological education goes, I don't know what else to tell you. But I do know for sure, 100%, that the reason why I pursued this arena is so that way I could be way more deeply and way more completely, way more fully informed in all of these areas that they then expect us to go and treat people individually. So when I was doing my master's, right, and so I had to do my thesis, right? I don't know if you ever had to write one of those or not, right? But I also had to do what? My clinical hours, right? Did you not know that you have to do clinical hours also? Because I did, right? And so where did I do my clinical
Under
hours?
the supervision of a person that
Yes.
was licensed. Thank you.
Yes.
You can't do it independently. I
So?
can.
So? Under the supervision.
Hey, great,
yes,
great
but I
deal.
did the treatment, right?
Listen,
you know that,
But
right?
time out, because we
can't do
got
this.
Wes got a hold on. Wes got a
I can't do
question.
this.
Wes got a question. Wes, go ahead with the question because I had two written up, and then there was something I was going to address before.
So I want to stop there. West asked me a question about nutrition that I didn't really care about. And I told him I did agree with him as far as a nutritional value affecting mental health. And so that's pretty much the gist of our interaction. And I hope to have an interaction, hopefully, with Classic Ruby again. Maybe that's the first time we actually had a heated debate, I would say. It's a very spirited debate. And maybe that will happen in the future. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on this particular video. Tell me whether or not you agree with my approach or her approach and how we presented ourselves. Just give me your overall opinion of the overall exchange, and we'll go from there. I don't talk about autism a lot because I don't see a lot of autistic clients. It's not my favorite area to talk about, although I do engage in it and have been pretty successful in helping people in this population. So with that being said, guys, I have a great day. This is your Black YouTube therapist, Derell.